Okay, thank you. I want to thank those of you who are both in Sitka and Nome for joining us. And I want to make an admission straight up front that when we've looked at the information that we have about radon, as far as actual test data from people maybe implementing different test kits into their homes or businesses, our data is fairly shy. Anecdotally, that is by word of mouth, we know that in the past that there's been some difficulties in Nome, being the type of terrain and geography that it is, with higher radon levels between the two schools and such, and that there's been mitigation systems implanted for those two schools. We're hoping that through this series of radon workshops, and of course this one is just a part of a train of presentations on the health happy hour. We're hoping that by doing a number of presentations around the state this spring, that people will actually go ahead and implement radon tests, and that we can get that information while keeping it confidential so that we have an idea a little more maybe methodically of where there are high radon levels. Now, let me just start out by asking, I see a couple of folks there in Sitka, 3 or 4 it looks like, and 1 in Nome. I'm wondering if any of you can just raise your hand, because I understand that the microphone is muted, as to whether you've ever tested for radon in your home residence before. No one's, is there one hand there? Okay. Radon is something that really a lot of folks hadn't heard about until the mid-1980s. It's kind of a quirky story as to how it became a concern in America. 3 Mile Island had obviously alerted our attention to radiation that could end up in our water systems and also end up in our residential homes. So about 4 years after 3 Mile Island, there were numerous styles of detection equipment placed in nuclear facilities so that when people left the facilities and went home, they could more or less be monitored as to what level of radiation maybe had attached itself to their clothes. There was one gentleman, Mr. Watras in Pennsylvania, who lived about 1.5 miles from the radiation plant, or excuse me, from the nuclear plant rather, and they started to detect detect radiation on his clothing. The only problem is that the alarms went off while he was entering the nuclear facility where he worked at, and not when he left. And so there was a lot of question as to what was happening. They went to his home because it didn't take them long to deduce that indeed a home which he had purchased a year prior to working at the plant had different levels of radiation that were significantly high, and that he was actually carrying it into the plant on his clothes from his house. So the company at that time that owned the nuclear plant went ahead and gathered data itself and worked with the Watchers family, and for about $30,000 in early 1980s dollars, they basically went ahead and mitigated his house. Now, I have to tell you, the alarm level that the EPA has set for common residents to kick into action as far as the amount of radiation that might be in their home is 4 picocuries per liter. 4 picocuries per liter. Mr. Watras' home actually came up in the thousands. And so thankfully he was only there for a year, and thankfully that the radon which infiltrated his home is a type of radiation that over a prolonged period of time compromises the lung tissue alone and can cause lung cancer. In fact, it's the second leading cause of lung cancer next to smoking in the United States. So in Mr. Watras' situation, he had a year of heavy doses, as did his wife and children. Now, he would be of age, actually, that he'd probably be in his 70s, and I've tried to find out and scoured the internet as to I hate to sound morbid, but if he had passed on, what his diagnosis was. And if he hadn't, or the members of his family, I've been interested in that too. Because what we know about radon at this point has really been heightened through 1980s studies that went into gear after discovery of his home. And they mostly studied miners who actually were a biased set because they smoked like chimneys, is my understanding. So they had kind of a double effect, per se. And there were miners that were in really constricted areas with a lot of radon and were in the mines maybe 8 or 12 hours a day. I never have found out about Mr. Watrous, and if you ever run into him, be sure to give me a call here at Extension 474-6366. I'd be interested to hear about his family's outcome. With that, I'd like to go ahead and show you a movie, if we can get it to go. The bandwidth on my end is sufficient, but I'd like to see if the bandwidth on your end will work. If it won't, I promise after about 1 minute, I'll take it down, and we'll go ahead and simply go with a slideshow. The movie I want to show, because of the fact that we're able to bring in about a half a dozen experts from around the state, health experts, experts who mitigate radon, experts who have work within the field of lung health and such. And so in kind of compiling a number of folks from different areas that have to do with the body and with radon, I think that'll kind of add to an interesting mix when we go into question and answer time. So at this time, what I'd like you to do, since your microphone is off, if for some reason you cannot hear or you cannot see the film, and give me about a half a minute here, sufficiently, where it's decent for you to understand it, please walk up to your lens and tap the lens. And with that, I'll go ahead and
Please do not touch the lenses of the cameras.
Okay, I'm sorry. Do not tap the lens, but maybe from about a foot back, wave your hand so that I can tell. Thank you, Carolyn. I'm sorry about that. Bad housekeeping on my part. So with that, let me prepare this. Okay. And we will give it a go here. Okay. And okay. Give me another moment. Oh, that's a slide. You see a slideshow right now? Please, blue slide. Okay. All right. Well, that's not what we want. So let me try something else here. Okay. All right. And no. Okay. Let's see if this works now. Okay. And you should see a screen, and I'll be putting this in full screen mode. Carolyn, can you see it decently?
Well, I see the player, but I don't see a movie on top of it. Is the movie showing on your end?
Yeah, it is. It's kind of showing a slide right now. It says Radon Overview. Hi, my name is Art Nance. Is there any sound coming out?
Well, I can hear a little bit of sound, but I can say that I don't see the movie, and depending on the format it's in, it may be set so it doesn't allow it to be transmitted this way. So,
okay.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, great. Is it large enough for people to understand?
I think so, but the volume might need to get turned up quite a bit because I can't hardly hear it.
Okay. After smoking. Historically, radon was not recognized. Is that decent? For humans until fairly recently.
Crank it all the way up.
Several factors have brought attention to the problems with radon. First, longevity. We live longer than we did 100 years ago, and we have more opportunity to develop the lung cancer that is a result of the long-term exposure of radon. We live in a more indoor lifestyle, in tighter homes. Unlike the houses of old, modern housing technology, like vapor barrier, can create a tight envelope that may allow indoor pollutants like radon to collect. There are 4 factors that cause radon gas to build up in a home. First, there must be adequate uranium in the soil. Radon gas is a product of uranium decay. Without uranium, there isn't radon. Second, there must be enough soil permeability from the bedrock into the home. There have to be avenues and paths for the gas to get to the home. Third, the house must have imperfections, holes, or cracks that allow radon to enter through the basement or crawl space. Fourth, the pressure inside the house must be lower than in the soil. Just heating a building will cause a negative pressure. Adding bathroom, kitchen, exhaust fans, and dryers increase the negative pressure. Some factors that might introduce radon into your environment are outside what you can control. But once you understand what radon is, how to test for it, and how to reduce elevated levels, it is a problem that is manageable. In Alaska, most of the accumulated data on radon levels is from the most populated areas of south central and interior Alaska, because that's where the majority of residents live. The orange area of this map reflects base levels of between 2 and 4 picocuries per liter. The yellow areas represent base levels of 2 or less picocuries per liter. Picocuries per liter of air is the unit of measure for radon. U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's action level, the level at which remediation to lower the levels is recommended, is 4 picocuries per liter of air.
Yeah, I've looked at a number of case studies of people's radon experience in Fairbanks. It was an interesting process. It's the radon experience in Fairbanks is variable across the borough. Some areas have a higher probability of having radon in your house than other areas. Of course, the only way to know for sure is to test your house.
The soils in Anchorage tend to be more clay, more peat. They're pretty soft. And what we have when we get further outside of the Anchorage Bowl is more rock. And there tends to be more uranium, which decays and becomes a radon, which becomes other things. That's what we're measuring for, is the radon. There seems to be more of that present in the rock soils as opposed to the peat and clay soils. In Anchorage, it doesn't seem to be so much, maybe a little more on the hillside. Most of the higher levels that I find of radon are out in Eagle River, Tugiak, and the Matsu Valley.
People say, well, how can I get rid of it? If I have radon, is it something that will go away? The answer is no, it will not go away by itself. Uranium has a half-life of just over right around 4 million years. Its decay is into radon. Radon has a half-life of just under 4 days. So, whereas you can rid your home of radon, you cannot rid the environment of the uranium or radium.
So radon is more prevalent in areas where houses are built close to bedrock. But without testing, you really don't know for sure if your house has a problem or not. We know that it comes from the decay of uranium in the soil. But does radon come from anywhere else?
Radon in water. I would have to say that it's not, very much is not as prevalent as radon gas is entering into a home. There have been some isolated incidences, and it's not a bad idea if you're worried about to have that checked, but it definitely is nowhere near the frequency that we see with just the gases entering the home.
The EPA sets a standard for air at 4 picocuries per liter, but there is no set standard for water. It takes about 10,000 picocuries of of radon in water to equal about 1 picocurie in air, and how the radon in water affects the air quality is through showers. When you aerate water by spraying a mist through showers or laundry or doing the dishes, then it becomes in the air and becomes a problem in inhalation. If you have water coming directly from groundwater through a well, then you might want to have your well water tested, because then that might be a contributing factor to the air quality in your house.
Now we know what radon is and where it comes from. Let's explore the health issues that are related to it.
When we breathe in radon, radon is usually in a gas form, and it enters the lung and reaches different parts of the lung. In itself, you don't usually see any immediate harm or health effects. However, radon is known to be carcinogenic. So if you keep getting exposed for a long time, this radon, just by the way it acts, it produces ionizing radiation, which could damage cells and DNA, our genetic material. And if this happens repeatedly and our body does not repair it or fix it, we could end up getting a lung tumor or a certain type of cancer in the lung. And again, our bodies have many mechanisms to combat these different mutations and damage, but in some cases it goes out of control and it could result in cancer.
The body is amazing at healing itself. So when you remove a toxin or pollutant or an irritant from the air that you're breathing in, you're always going to be better off. And the body will heal itself to the best of its ability. Now that said, you may still contract lung cancer down the road from exposure early on.
National and international bodies like the Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry and the World Health Organization have placed radon as the second cause of lung cancer in people, only next to cigarette smoking.
Human nature is if we don't see it, we don't think about it. And so many pollutants are invisible, including radon, carbon monoxide, other gases like that are invisible, but that doesn't mean that they aren't harmful to human health. There are many potential or even common pollutants in the home. What's unusual about radon is that it's a naturally occurring gas that comes up through the ground, seeps into your home, and then becomes dangerous.
Now we know where radon comes from and how it affects us. How do we find out if we have an elevated radon level in our home? Because radon is odorless and colorless, the only way to know if you have a radon problem in your home is to test. And there are several types of tests. Some are short-term and some are long-term. Let's take a look at the different types of tests. Probably the first test an individual might use is a charcoal test. It's the quickest test to employ, and it's a screener. A test you do determine if further testing is required. To do the test, place it on the lowest living level of your home for a 3-day period, giving you a snapshot average. Another homeowner-friendly test is the alpha track test. It's deployed in a similar way as the charcoal test, but what makes it a more robust test is that it takes into account a broader time frame, from a couple of weeks to a year, so that it gives you a more leveled average. Finally, when it comes to homeowner testing for radon, a continuous digital radon monitor can give an instantaneous, real-time reading of radon gas levels. Unlike the two other tests, this one does not need any other professional assistance in lab work or analysis of data. It's not a one-time test, but one that you can keep in your home as long as you feel a need for it. And particularly, it's useful for long-term monitoring for those who've taken steps to reduce elevated levels of radon in their home to gauge the effectiveness of the mitigation and its continued performance over time. These three tests can give you a broad indication of the levels of radon you have, but to get a really accurate reading, you may want to call in the professional, who using air sampling equipment can give you a very precise graphed reading over a 72-hour period.
I'll place this unit, say in the lowest living area of the home. We shield it from the sun. Put our sample port approximately 18 inches off the ground, and we'll leave it here for a minimum of 3 days. It will then sample and data log those sample points. We'll collect it after the time frame, print it out, and find out if the home has exceeded or is below the 4 picocuries per liter.
Okay, you've tested the radon levels in your home and found that they exceed the EPA's action level of 4 picocuries per liter of air, and that remediation is needed to bring those levels down. If your levels are just a bit above the action level, say 5 or 6 picocuries, you may be able to bring the levels down to 4 or below with some simple sealing techniques on cracks and utility penetrations, such as waste pipes or electrical conduits in your basement slab and walls. Just sealing penetrations may not be enough to get below the EPA's recommended 4 picocuries per liter. More intensive remediation materials and techniques may be required, starting with the least invasive techniques and moving to the more involved ones. Now, let's visit a homeowner as he begins the installation of plastic sheeting that will act as a radon barrier in his crawl space.
This is that crawl space of the house we just bought in August, and we had it tested for radon during our inspection period with Arctic Technical Services, and we found that we had 4.8. So it was recommended to us that we pull out all of the cheap old 3 mil Visqueen that was on our dirt crawl space floor, and we just replace that with some good new Visqueen and retest, and that might solve our problem. So while I was at it, our energy audit said we should add some insulation down here. So as you can see, I tore out all the stuff that was in here. I added some of this 2.5-inch blue board, and then I got some of this really good vapor barrier, and this is Too Tough is the brand. It's made in Wisconsin, and it's only 3 mils, but it's this cross-laminated, high-quality polyethylene. And the advantage of this over the regular 4 or 6 mil stuff that you might buy at one of the warehouses in town is that it's much higher quality, so it has much less permeability to vapor, and it's also a lot tougher, so you can't rip it. You can cut it easily with scissors, but it's not going to get pinholes if you walk on it. So I just figured as long as I'm doing this, might as well do it once and not have to redo it in a couple of years. So now I'm going to seal a sheet of this vapor barrier coming down from my foundation wall to the vapor barrier I've got going on the floor here. And I'm going to do that. First of all, I'm going to overlap the sheets by, they say, at least a foot. I think we've got a little more than that here. And I'm going to run a bead of this acoustical sealant, aka Black Death, and then I'm going to tape it with some vapor barrier tape. So this is my first time doing this, so we'll just give it a shot. Okay, so I'll lay the vapor barrier down over that seam. And I'm going to smooth that bead out. And the reason we use this stuff is it always stays sticky. It's going to make a really nice barrier that won't let any radon or moisture or anything through from the floor into my crawl space after this. And then finally, I'll just finish it with some of this vapor barrier tape.
Again, there's no house that can't be fixed, and sometimes it's you start with one process with a passive amount of remediation schedule like they're doing downstairs. If we were to find that this test were to come up high, then what we'd want to do is then vent the subsurface to the outside. If that didn't work, then we'd want to put an assisted vent or pull negative pressure below the vapor retarder in the crawl space and vent that to the outside. And since we have that in place, it would be very easy to do. Well, it's relatively easy to do, but it definitely will accomplish the job.
If after properly sealing the polyplastic sheet over the raw ground in your crawl space, or sealing all cracks and holes in your cement slab basement, you still are above the EPA's benchmark, then relieving the relative negative pressure in your home is essential. That negative pressure may be drawing radon in. Thus, have your forced air furnace and heat recovery ventilation system checked out to reduce undue pulling of air that creates negative pressure. If after taking these measures you still are above the EPA's benchmark, you most likely will want to depressurize the soil under your basement or crawl space. Pulling contaminated air from the soils with an electric fan in a plastic pipe that continuously intercepts the radon-laden air from the soil before it can enter the house. This creates a negative pressure below the slab or vapor barrier, exhausting the contaminated air to outside air. Up to this point, we've been looking at how you mitigate radon danger in an existing home, but in new construction, steps can also be taken to avoid radon problems from the outset. I'll go ahead and just step in here from there with a short slideshow. Some of what you're about to see you've already witnessed, and I'm just going to go over a few points to emphasize some of the points made on the movie. First of all, radon, as was mentioned, is a problem because over time its accumulation can have an effect on the tissues of your lungs and produce the added risk of having lung cancer. And I want to emphasize that lung cancer is exacerbated not just by the sum of the risk from the smoking and the sum of the radon, but the two mingle together and actually make your chances of having lung cancer much more severe than if you were just to add the two risks together. As the film also mentioned, it does occur for the most part in Alaska, from what we know from the EPA, along this kind of upside down banana, if you would, or this crescent from the Canadian border in the interior on down through Matanuska and Kenai. However, there have been elevated levels which indicate to the EPA that this is kind of a medium danger area. Also down in Ketchikan, and there is a good amount over in British Columbia. As I mentioned, known because of some of the mining in the past, mining tailings and such like that, some of the uranium available, has also been an area where there's been concern in addition. Now, I want to let you know that just because there's uranium in the soil doesn't mean that you're necessarily in danger. I can assure you that even though in the types of homes, the type of home that we saw so far, you can have radon and your neighbor on either side, you may not have any problem with it, or vice versa. I can assure you that my house will never have radon, at least accumulating in it. And that's because on permafrost up in the northern areas of the state, North Slope, Kobuk area, some in Nome, and certainly on over in the Yukon-Koyukuk or interior area, many of the homes are built 3 foot off the ground to allow cold air to circulate underneath and blow away heat so it doesn't melt the permafrost and create a slurry of mud which will compromise the foundation of the house. And because the house does not touch the ground, those homes, again, being about 3 foot off the ground and what we traditionally call pad and post foundation, they will never have it accumulate. Instead, whatever uranium is off-gassing radon will simply, the radon coming from off-gassing off of uranium will simply be blown away, so to speak, and not accumulate. The other thing that I'd like to emphasize that I think that the movie mentioned well is you heard it several times. How can you know if you have a radon problem? Well, if your house is somehow connected to the ground by crawl space or basement, the only way, and you probably heard this at least a half a dozen times in this film, which was by design, that you can know if you have a radon problem. That is, a measurement of accumulated radon over 4 picocuries per liter is to test. And I also want to state that as I showed in the film, or at least my hands did, there's 3-day tests that just give you a 1 number average, such as the charcoal tray. There's 1 month to 1 year tests, which are the round canister that I pinned to the wall, kind of a plastic canister. The advantage is that if over a 3-day period you had some kind of anomaly, like the kids were running in and out of the house on all weekend or such, letting all the radon concentration out, those types of anomalies or ups and downs get kind of averaged out. The other thing, though, that I'd like to mention is that if someone called me today and said, well, I tested 7 years ago, it'd be a good idea to test again. I suggest every 5 years, or if there's been a seismic event that you know about, or possibly a change in your water table, or even a flood. It's those type of geological events that, as the film showed, when the arrows were coming up of radon gas from the uranium, they're looking for vents or avenues, cracks in rock, soils that are real gravelly with air pockets so that it can move through. Well, it may be that after a seismic event or the water table changing, those avenues are cut open, or maybe new ones are widened that weren't a problem before underneath your home. So testing is cheap, it's inexpensive as far as your time and effort as well, and it's something anybody can do. And it basically is done by placing the unit at that part of the house that you tend to live in a good part of the day. Your bedroom, you're probably there 8 hours a day. Good place for a radon test. Lowest bedroom in the house. Kitchen, dining room, you might be there 6 hours a day. Good place to test. Now, if you had a crawl space or a basement with a laundry room that you just went down to 1 hour a day, it really wouldn't be all that major, even if you had high levels, because you're down there for such a short period of time. So again, test in the lowest living area of your home, and that will give you an indication of what the concentrations are. And I might add, during a time of the year when your house is generally closed up. That way you get a worst case scenario, which tends to be winter. So there's still plenty of time to test, whether you're certainly going to do the short-term test, or which you employ yourself, or even the long-term test. We still have several months before breakup, maybe. And so feel free to go ahead and get a test. Now, I'd like to tell you that hardware stores, building supply stores, big box stores, you can buy, especially the short-term ones yourself. Read the back, though. When you pay $15 on average, see if the lab fee is covered. See if the postage is covered. That'll give you a true idea of what you're going to need to lay out. Here at Cooperative Extension, we've gone with a company that has a good track record that is easy to use. It's the canister style that was used in the film, and it simply holds in it a small piece of film that when you write down the date that you put it in and the date that you took it out, at least a month, no more than a year, you can go ahead and put it in one of these boxes that are self-stamped already, and you can go ahead and send it off. You can send it to, the company. It's already addressed, and they'll get back to you in 3 days with a copy of the reading. What if your reading is high? What if it's a 5.6? What if it's a 10? Anything above 4.0 picocuries per liter, you test again. You get another kit, and you try, because there may have been some type of anomaly that happened while you were testing, and you want to be sure before you take the time and effort to take action. As shown in the film, action might be as simple as putting down a plastic barrier and securing it to the wall, whether it be treated wood or cement, with a type of acoustical sealant, aka Black Death, as the gentleman said in the film. Or it may also be going through the slab or the flat cement floor and filling up all cracks. And I actually have different product sheets on really good cement block filler that you can apply with a caulking gun or a putty knife. Now, at this point, I'd like to go ahead and take questions, but first I'd like to give you my email, and here's why. I'm going to go ahead and let you know that my email, ALNASHJR, it reads Al Nash Jr. at alaska.edu. If you'll just send me your name and your email, I'm going to have a drawing and give a kit away, and I'll send it out to you if you'd like to test. So please email me at alnashjr@alaska.edu if you have a desire to go ahead and be in a drawing for the kit. One of the neat things is that when the kits go out and the results come back, even your results are confidential. So they're between you, the testing company, and I receive an anonymous set of the results that doesn't have your name attached, but does have the community location. So we get a better idea the more that you test, because of the data being shared on a somewhat anonymous basis with us as to where the hot spots in the state might be. With that, I'd like to go ahead and open up for any questions, which means that you'll want to go ahead and turn the mic on. You will go ahead and hear an echoey sound, but ask any questions you'd like.
Do you sell the kits? Do you sell the kits?
Yes, we do. We've got the kits here at Cooperative Extension, and we charge a $25 fee to cover our costs, and we buy them in wholesale bulk. So generally, included with the kit is the ability to go ahead and send it in without any more charge, get your labs taken care of without any charge, just a one-time flat fee. And the ones that we, oh, I'm sorry.
Is that Sitka that's asking?
Yes.
They're available at the extension office in Sitka, but right now I know that the admin assistant is out of town, and I think she comes back.
She's sitting right next to me. She's sitting right next to me.
Oh, good, Jasmine. Do you
Hi,
have
Jasmine.
Hello.
Do you have them there in the office?
Carmen was supposed to send some. We don't have any currently, but
Okay.
My other question is it a good idea to maybe buy 3 and put them in different locations?
That's a good question. In general, if you had a very large home, let's say over 2,000 square foot, you might go ahead, and especially if it was kind of a split level, so that your dining room and your kitchen were maybe half a story above the bedrooms down below, and it was something like a 4,000 square foot house or such, it wouldn't hurt to go ahead and put one on that split level. where you spend a lot of your time, and down in the bedrooms per se. And if you had a house that obviously was 4,000 to 6,000 square foot, it wouldn't hurt to put one, even if it's all one common level, on different corners of the house.
Thank you. But you were saying in Sitka the chances of having a problem are pretty low.
I don't know that the chances are having a problem are low, but I do know that when we've taken a look at the data that was done in 1989, so there's been possibly a lot of changes geologically since then. But in 1989, it showed low levels for Sitka, with just a handful, though, of results that came in. And so I wouldn't put much trust in right now in 2014 into just saying I won't test because basically there hasn't been much found here. The survey that was done by the Geological Survey was very limited, and the sample method that they used was adequate. But if I was a homeowner, again, especially knowing that there's the opportunity for there to be possibly radon with a neighbor, I would go ahead and test regardless. Now, there's some communities, especially those that maybe are on an alluvial plain, where they have a couple feet of thick silt that's really mucky and wet. It's pretty safe to say that unless you dig down into that silt and you were to actually be on top of it, and there are buildings like that, especially along Prince William Sound, it's pretty safe to say that probably even as if there is uranium deposits underneath, as the radon effervesces above, it's probably going to be blocked by that silt. Now, having said that, we have places in Fairbanks where people are on hard rock and there's schists, natural cracks. And some of them, if they're down by the Tanana River or kind of toward that, coming down the mountain or the hill, so to speak, or the ridge, let's say, it's very possible that if there's a good silt buildup, it can act as a barrier. But again, from house to house, you really never know. And the most, I guess, probably a bountiful chance that you have as a builder of opening yourself up to those routes or avenues of radon to come through would be if you had hard rock and you scraped everything or you blew the rock away and put your house straight on the rock. That could be troublesome because you don't have that extra barrier of soil, and you may have just availed yourself to the cracks that work themselves up. But remember, it's not just about the availability of radon. It's not just about the cracks. It's not just about the soil. It's also about your home, the pressure or the vacuum-like negative pressure that might exist in your basement or crawl space simply because of mechanical equipment that you have in the home.
Could you review the mechanical equipment that caused the problem again, because it was hard to understand what they were saying?
Sure. The mechanical equipment that, I'm sorry, you want me to review the mechanical equipment that's used to dissipate the problem?
No, that causes the problem. That creates the problem. That creates the negative pressure.
The mechanics per se. Okay, you bet. I see what you're saying. So in your basement or your crawl space, you may have a situation where your HRV, at least in the interior, this is true, where we have a box. And the box is often in the crawl space or basement and has hoses that go outside and bring cold air in. And those hoses, when they bring it into the box, it's also bringing from ducts in other parts of the house air that's already warm and putting it into the box. And it kind of, the heat exchanges. And it's HRV equipment, HVAC system. And it's those type of systems that often, if they're not calibrated correctly, can cause almost like, you wouldn't feel it, but almost like a vacuum effect or a sucking effect in the room that you're in. Another instance is a air furnace, a combustion air furnace. If it's not calibrated correctly, it's possible that it's sucking in a lot of air. And depending on what the venting of the furnace is like out of the house, and possibly the exterior winds and such, you could end up with a situation where you get a sucking through the furnace. So you'd want that calibrated just to reduce that negative pressure. Lastly, believe it or not, something as simple as the rubber seal that goes around the hole that you stick clothes in a dryer, if that's missing, then instead of just having stagnant air that's being heated up in your dryer as it tumbles, it may actually be sucking air in, or if it's vastly compromised. And it may be creating, like I say, a very light vacuum that you couldn't detect by your skin or anything like that. But there are different types of meters that are used to try to detect whether the pressure in the house has a slight vacuum, i.e. in the basement.
My HRV is in my bathroom. It's not in the crawl space. So how would that affect?
So generally speaking, is your HRV, is it a double-story home and it's on the first level?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. So, and you're a crawl space or a basement with a cement slab?
It's a crawl space. It's partially cement and partially not. This is just a dirt.
Okay.
But I've got it covered with Visqueen.
And very well secured around the edges, so it's almost airtight, the Visqueen?
I just learned that tonight.
Okay,
It will be soon.
I'm sure it will be. And by the way, don't be afraid of using that Black Death. Once you get it on you, it's going to be on you for a week. It's gooey, it's mushy, but if you can lay a bead about the size of your thumb, about 1.5 foot in from the end of the Visqueen, so it'll still stick to the wall, you lay a thick bead and then really rub it hard so that you get about a 3 or 4 inch ribbon of that goop, and that'll assure for a good amount. Now, as far as your question on the HRV, without actually seeing the configuration and knowing about if there's a range hood that's maybe pulling in the kitchen, or if possibly there are other bathroom fans running, I would say that in general, if your HRV is on the first floor and it's out of the basement or crawl space, you're probably not going to end up with that kind of suction effect as if it was in the basement. You're probably safe. Now, the other thing to remember is that in cold weather, and I realize I'm talking more of Arctic weather, there's a natural effect anyway in a house to have a negative pressure. And that's because cold air often comes in the basement. It warms up naturally through the heat of the structure, and then it rises and creates this stack effect. Now, in Southeast, you also have another mitigating factor that you'd have to include, and that is that I know a number of the homes in Southeast aren't necessarily on forced furnaces, but rather many of them are operating off of these Sanyo and Mitsubishi type of heat exchangers, kind of like an air conditioner that actually operates backwards to create heat in the house. And so if somebody has something like that, where there's kind of a sucking in the wall where it's placed vertically, I don't know how that would, I know some Southeast communities, they're using those now because your temperatures aren't all that cold in the winter anyway, and I don't know how that would affect it.
The film didn't show how to connect the top part of the Visqueen to the structure. It just showed that black, whatever it was that you mentioned. Yeah. How do you connect the top part?
So is your pony wall or the short wall in the crawl space, is it cement block?
Some of it, and then I have to look. I don't remember exactly, but I think some of it's cement block.
Okay, here's what my suggestion would be. In your situation, you might even have a situation in Sitka where there's also timbers or such. The best thing to do is, if this is your basement, and I know this isn't probably the optimal visual aid here, teaching aid, but if the tips of my fingers are kind of where the floor of the first story comes across, I would try, there's a sill plate there. There's a sill plate that usually of a 2x8 generally wood that rests on the top cinder blocks. And I would go ahead and have a sheet of Visqueen Black Death all the way around that sill plate. Now, it's not always easy because you're going to also, where that sill plate is kind of where the wall of the house starts, or actually the beams that hold your floor up. But as best as you can, I would go around, and I could actually get you better illustrations if you want to email me. And I would attach up their sheet, and I would bring it down so that it overlaps where it would naturally come to the end of the ground by about a foot. And then when I cut the Visqueen for the basement floor, I would make sure that there was a foot overlap also that would naturally flop onto the walls after I covered the floor. Therefore, I overlap a foot on a foot, and I peel back, and at about a half a foot, I'll put a bead of Visqueen, flop it over, make my ribbon of Black Death so that it's actually Visqueen to Visqueen. And then I would go ahead and simply use that red tape to secure the edges. And again, if you email me, I can take some pictures.
Okay, thank you. I actually have the Visqueen up onto that level that you're talking about now, and I have rocks holding it up. So can I just put the red tape on it instead of the rocks?
The red tape would be preferable over the rocks. This is the comparison I've heard that, and this is anecdotal, nobody's ever scientifically photographed this, obviously. But most of the people I've talked to, and some of them have been in the business for 30 plus years of radon when it first became an issue back in the 80s. The comment has been made that a visible crack in your slab floor, cement slab floor, is to an atom of radon such as a marble would be to the Grand Canyon. Okay, that may be hyperbole, but it emphasizes the fact that if you were to tape it and there were parts that lifted away or pulled back or kind of puckered so that there wasn't a good seal and there was a little bit of puckering gap between part of the cement wall and the Visqueen, it's not doing you a whole lot of good. In other words, 98% of the coverage does not guarantee you 98% blockage. Tape is better than rocks, but you want to make sure that that tape seals well. The nice thing about putting the tape on and peeling it, kind of pulling it back about 6 inches and then putting your Black Death, is once you put that goop on and you mash it down for that visible ribbon, it's fairly impenetrable, and all the tape is doing is just tacking up the one Visqueen layer to the other.
Thank you so much.
You bet. Any other questions? Well, thank you. I appreciate you for giving me this opportunity, and I will sign off. By the way, I'm offering this on the OWL Network tomorrow at noon at various libraries where the librarians sign up. So if you know somebody who wasn't there tonight who must see this, feel free to go ahead and let them know that it's on tomorrow at noon on the OWL Network, same location where you're at. Thank you very much for